In a time where the British government felt its grasp over territories weaken, one group seized the opportunity to challenge imperial rule and left a lasting impact on their country and freedom. Although it failed as a military force, it inspired nationalism all over India, unifying Indians across social divisions and sparking a military revolt that weakened British control and ultimately led to India's independence. This is the story of the Indian National Army. Following the East India Company's victory at Plassey in 1757, India became a crucial source of raw material for the British Empire, a role that intensified after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Once the British government took direct control, labor, resources, and institutions were all under strict oversight, deepening resentment towards colonial rule. This relationship reached its breaking point during World War II, when Britain adopted a Europe-first strategy and left South Asian colonies underprepared for Japanese military invasions. While Britain focused on German advances in Europe, British rule in India became anxious and fragile, as historian John Wilson notes, paving the way for a revolutionary movement that would redefine Indian rule. In 1942, Raj Bihari Bose, an Indian revolutionary fleeing British India, founded the Indian Independence League in Japan with the goal of ending British rule. After convincing Japanese military to support their organization, he partnered with Subhash Chandra Bose, a radical leader expelled from the Indian National Congress, to form a revolutionary fighting force, the Indian National Army. Together, they planned to advance with Japanese forces and persuade Indian soldiers under British command to join India's fight for liberation. This recruitment strategy was put into action during the Japanese invasion of Malaya. With the help of the League, the Japanese advanced quickly, leading to the surrender of Singapore, Britain's key South Asian base. The surrender resulted in the capture of thousands of Indian soldiers, which Captain Shah Nawaz Khan classified into three groups. Committed nationalists joined the INA, others were persuaded through propaganda, and those who refused to join were taken to Japanese prisoner of war camps. The INA quickly grew to more than 40,000 troops, transforming British military defeat into political opportunity. Subhash Chandra Bose, the leader of the army, sought to establish an independent regime opposed to British authority, with the INA not only as its military force, but a foundation of political legitimacy. Under his leadership, the provisional government of Azad Hind succeeded in proclaiming authority over the large Indian population in Southeast Asia. As a sovereign state, it established its own currency and judicial system, showing that Indians could govern themselves, undermining British authority. Moreover, it gained recognition from Axis and Axis-aligned governments.
India and Japan have in the past been bound by deep cultural ties which are about 20 centuries old. In recent times, these cultural relations have been interrupted because of the British domination of India. It is, however, certain that when India is free, these relations will be revived.
The revolution had extended beyond male soldiers. In 1943, the INA formed the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, the first female combat unit in modern military history. Named after a renowned freedom fighter, the regiment challenged British authority both socially as well as militarily, defying colonial assumptions that women were passive and apolitical. These women showed that the independence struggle was inclusive, expanding who could resist imperial control and participate in the fight for freedom.
And in the case of women, they will be fighting for two things. One, the independence of their country, and the second thing is their own independence and emancipation.
Yet, first-hand accounts from INA soldiers revealed coercion, suffering, and internal discipline, evidence that the British later used to build their legal case against the INA. Indian soldiers who refused to join the INA were sent to Japanese prisoner of war camps, where many endured severe starvation, beatings, and neglect, with more than 12,000 soldiers dead. A diary written by an INA soldier included hand-drawn escape maps, suggesting that survival rather than national liberation was the motivation for enlistment. Once they joined INA camps, loyalty and sacrifice was strictly enforced. Soldiers were subject to severe punishments if loyalty was questioned, and officers delivered lectures glorifying soldiers who chose death over betrayal and INA martyrs.
There, in his speech to us, he gave us the slogan of blood, blood and Chalo Delhi. That became our battle cry from then onwards.
These internal practices allowed the British to frame the INA not as a liberation movement, but a coercive military force. On March 9, 1945, the British government charged the Indian National Army with waging war against the king, murder, and abetment of murder. Lieutenant Sahgal, Captain Shahnawaz Khan, and Lieutenant Dillon were all put at trial at Red Fort. Prosecution evidence with INA records, organizational charts, and testimonies from over 30 witnesses portrayed the army as a tool of the enemy, arguing that its alliance with Japan made it an extension of Axis power. The Indian National Congress, along with the INA's legal team, countered the prosecution's narrative by reframing the INA as a patriotic army for India's liberation rather than a Japanese puppet force. All three leaders insisted enlistment was voluntary. Witnesses testified that concentration camps were completely unheard of. Bola Bhai Desai, an eminent lawyer and an important part of the trial, argued that a nation is entitled to wage war for its liberation. Despite these compelling arguments, the court sentenced the soldiers to deportation for life. Instead of destroying the INA's reputation, however, the proceedings transformed the INA as a symbol of resistance, planting a seed of patriotism among the future citizens of India. News like the Hindustan Times and Bombay Sentinel all widely reported the case and sparked backlash. Congress leaders like Nehru connected the INA's struggle with India's broader independence movement. Protests erupted across the country. In Calcutta, student demonstrators from across India marched to Dalhousie Square, tying flags as a symbol of anti-imperialist unity. These demonstrations linked individuals across all social and religious communities. As public unrest remained, the British government decided to commute the sentences, but the lasting impact had already been made. The British Army had been heavily dependent on the 2.5 million Indian soldiers to maintain their power and assets in India, but a wave of revolutionary fervor among the soldiers had weakened their authority. The INA had served as an inspiration for members of the Royal Indian Navy, who learned from what the INA had exposed. The British were no longer an impenetrable force. In the wake of the INA trials, Indian soldiers openly began to discuss politics, read nationalist newspapers, and submitted individual letters protesting against British authority, showing the spread of political awareness among soldiers shaped directly by the INA's example. After decades of unequal pay, poor rations, and discrimination, this growing political awareness evolved into demand for systemic reform. Known as the Royal Indian Navy Mutiny, 20,000 naval personnel from 78 ships all over India rebelled against British rule. Revolting sailors tore down the British flag and hoisted 3 flags tied together: that of the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, and the Communist Party, representing political and religious unity in pursuit of national reform. Other branches of the army, including the Royal Indian Air Force and local police, joined the widespread movement. Indian soldiers now openly stated they would no longer fire on their own people and were instead united against the fight for independence. Without any personnel willing to police or suppress the Indian public, British governance had become impossible and had stepped down a few months later. What the INA had ignited was not temporary unrest, but a movement that reformed a nation through independence itself. While the INA failed militarily, its symbolic message ignited a revolution that challenged British authority in a way no battlefield victory could. By inspiring a revolt within the British Indian Armed Forces, it exposed Britain's weaknesses, sparking a wave of nationalist unity across social, political, religious, and gender lines. Military uprisings driven by the INA showed British authority that India could no longer be controlled, reforming imperial rule by accelerating independence. In its struggle and sacrifice, the Indian National Army showed that the courage of a few could shake the foundations of an empire.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, When the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.